Hey folks, welcome back to Cowboy Ironheart, where the wind across the Montana Territory carries stories of broken hearts finding their way home. Tonight we got something special for you, a tale that will pull at every string in your chest. Picture this. The year is Bay, and the dusty main street of Willow Creek is buzzing like a hornet's nest on a hot summer day. Little 6-year-old twins, Elias and Emma, are clinging to the skirts of a fragile young widow who's barely holding herself together. Their small voices crack as they sob out loud. "Please, Miss Rowena, don't let him take you away. We don't want to lose you too." The whole town is watching, some folks smirking, others turning their backs like they can be bothered. That's when the drifter rides in, the man from her past, tall and mean-eyed, dust kicking up behind his horse like trouble itself. He swings down and starts shouting that she's still his by rights, that a mail-order bride who ran off don't get to forget where she came from. Rowena's face goes pale as fresh snow, her slender shoulders trembling, but she does a run. She just stands there between those children and the man who once shattered her world. The crowd laughs low and cruel. One woman sneers loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, looks like the delicate little widow's past finally caught up with her. About time somebody put her back in her place." But then the ground seems to shake just a little. Boots heavier than any man's have a right to become thudding down the boardwalk. And there he is, Garrick, the giant cowboy who owns the biggest spread in the territory, stepping right between Rowena and that drifter like a mountain come to life. His steel blue eyes lock on the troublemaker, voice low and calm but carrying the weight of thunder. "It's over. You tayu Rono around and ride out now, or Motlaglunk make sure you never forget what leaving looks like." The drifter's hand twitches toward his gun, but something in Garrick's massive frame makes him freeze. The whole town holds its breath, and that's just the beginning of how one quiet giant changed everything for a fragile widow and 2 scared orphans who needed a real home. Stick with me, this one's going to heal something deep inside you tonight. If you're already feeling that pull in your chest from how those little ones were clinging to Rowena, then settle in deeper, because this story is only getting started. Hit that like button if you believe good men still walk this earth, and let's ride this one all the way to the end together. Now, to truly understand why the whole town turned on Rowena that day, we have to go back 6 months earlier when the stagecoach wheels first creaked into Willow Creek, carrying the most delicate-looking woman anyone had ever seen. Rowena stepped down in her worn blue calico dress, clutching a single carpet bag, her hazel eyes wide with nervous hope after answering a mail-order advertisement from a man named Silas Crow. She was 25 years old, already a widow from back east, where fever had taken her first husband, and left her with nothing but grief and empty pockets. The advertisement promised a steady rancher needing a gentle wife to help build a home. What she found instead was a liar and a drunk. Silas took one look at Moat for petite frame and laughed right there in the street. He said loud enough for half the town to hear, "Mort ordered a strong farm wife, not some porcelain doll who will snap in the first hard winter." The very next week, he drank himself stupid, fell off his horse and broke his neck on the way back from the saloon. Left Rowena with nothing, not even a proper claim to the rundown shack he'd called a homestead. The townsfolk smelled weakness like wolves smell blood. They circled fast. The banker sneered as he foreclosed on the property 2 weeks later, saying a fragile little thing like her could never manage 40 acres anyway. The mercantile owner raised prices on her supplies and whispered to customers that she probably brought bad luck with her from back east. Women crossed the street when they saw her coming, muttering that a widow who couldn't keep one husband surely wouldn't keep another. Children were pulled away from her like she carried some sickness. Through it all, Rowena kept her chin up, taking in laundry and mending to survive, her slender hands raw from lye soap and cold creek water. But the cruelest blow came when the drifter rode into town 3 days before that confrontation on Main Street. Harlan was his name, Silas' older brother, a hard-eyed man with a reputation for trouble across 3 territories. He stormed into the boarding house where Rowena rented a tiny room and slammed his fist on the table. "You belong to my brother by contract, girl. That means you belong to me now. Moat Laglunk drag you back to my claim kicking and screaming if Moat have to. The land, the debts, everything. A woman alone out here ain't got no rights." Rowena's voice trembled but did not break as she answered, "Moat never signed anything binding me to you, sir. Moat came here with an open heart and Moat lost everything. Leave me be." Harlan only laughed, a cold mocking sound that carried down the hallway. "You Laglunk come crawling back when winter hits and that pretty face of yours freezes off. Mark my words." The twins, Elias and Emma, had lost their own parents to a wagon accident months earlier and were being passed around the town like unwanted parcels. They had taken to following Rowena everywhere, drawn to her gentle way of speaking, and the way she never raised her voice even when life kept knocking her down. Little Emma would slip her small hand into Rowena's and whisper, "You smell like flowers and safety, Miss Rowena." Elias would stand in front of her like a tiny shield whenever adults glared too long. Those children saw what the grown folks refused to see, a woman with a heart big enough to hold the whole broken world. The day of the confrontation, Harlan had come looking for her again, this time with two rough friends at his back. He grabbed Rowena's arm right there in the street and started pulling her toward his horse. The twins screamed and clung tighter, their innocent voices cutting through the crowd like knives. "Don't take our Miss Rowena. She's the only one who reads us stories and makes the hurt go away." That S when the heavy footsteps sounded. Garrick had been riding in from his mountain ranch to pick up supplies, his massive frame filling the saddle like a legend come down from the peaks. At 6'8" and built like the mountains themselves, he moved with surprising quiet grace for a man his size. He had watched Rowena from a distance for weeks, never speaking, just noting how she treated those orphans had more kindness than the whole town combined. Something in her fragile strength had stirred the quiet protector in him. He stepped down from the boardwalk and the ground seemed to protest under his weight. Without raising his voice, without even clenching a fist, Garrick placed his enormous body directly between Harlan and Rowena. His steel blue eyes locked onto the drifter with calm authority that made lesser men want to disappear. "It's over." The words rolled out low and final like distant thunder promising a storm. "You got no claim here. Turn around." Harlan sneered, trying to save face in front of the watching crowd. "You gonna hide behind a giant widow? Pathetic." The townspeople chuckled nervously, waiting to see if the big man would back down. But Garrick didn't move. He simply crossed those massive arms over his chest, the fabric of his flannel shirt stretching tight, and stared until Harlan's bravado cracked. The drifter spat on the ground, muttered curses, and backed toward his horse with his friends. But everyone knew this wasn't finished. Rowena looked up at Garrick then, her hazel eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something softer, something like the first spark of trust in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying on the prairie wind. He gave the smallest nod, his rugged face softening just a fraction. "No need for thanks, ma'am. A man does what's right." The twins peeked out from behind her skirts, staring up at the giant cowboy with wonder instead of fear. Elias tugged Rowena's sleeve. "Is he a real mountain, Miss Rowena?" Garrick's mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile breaking through that stoic mask as he looked down at the children. "Not a mountain, son. Just a man who knows when something worth protecting comes along." From that moment, the destined encounter had begun. The town might have turned its back on the fragile widow, but the silent protector had stepped forward, and nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same. Rowena felt the first fragile thread of safety wrap around her battered heart, while Garrick, who had lived alone on his ranch for years carrying his own quiet sorrows, felt something long frozen begin to thaw. The prairie wind picked up, carrying wood smoke from distant chimneys and the promise of healing rains yet to come. But the real storm was only gathering on the horizon. The days that followed that tense standoff on Main Street settled into a fragile kind of peace, the kind that feels like a single deep breath before the next gust of wind tries to knock you down. Rowena returned to her tiny rented room above the boarding house, but something had shifted inside her. The giant cowboy's quiet stand had planted a small seed of courage in her heart, and she tended it carefully. The way she tended the little window box of wildflowers she kept alive with creek water and stubborn hope. She woke before dawn each morning, her slender hands already moving as she prepared simple meals for the twins who now spent most days with her. Elias and Emma had been officially placed in her temporary care by the reluctant town preacher after no relatives claimed them. The arrangement was meant to be short, but Rowena made it feel like home. She would sit on the edge of the narrow bed, brushing Emma's tangled hair with gentle strokes while humming an old lullaby from back east. The little girl's voice would rise soft and trusting, "Miss Rowena, your hands are warm like Mama's used to be." Elias, trying so hard to be the man of the house at 6 years old, would help carry water buckets twice his size, his small chest puffing out with pride whenever Rowena praised him. The town watched and whispered. They expected her to crumble. Instead, Rowena proved her quiet resilience in ways that shamed the loudest voices. When the mercantile owner refused her credit for flour, she walked 3 miles to the creek, gathered wild berries and herbs, and traded them door to door for supplies. Her delicate frame moved with surprising endurance across the prairie, the hem of her calico skirt dusty and torn but her hazel eyes steady. Women who had once crossed the street now found jars of her homemade preserves left quietly on their porches with a simple note. "For your table." No payment needed. Some threw them away. Others tasted the sweetness and felt the first crack in their cruelty. Garrick kept his distance at first, watching from the shadows of his wagon or the far end of the street. He was not a man of pretty words or grand gestures. But every few days a bundle would appear on Rowena's doorstep, firewood neatly stacked and split, or a haunch of fresh venison wrapped in clean cloth, no note. Just the quiet evidence of a protector who saw what others refused to. Rowena would stand in her doorway, at dusk the prairie wind tugging loose strands of her chestnut hair, and look toward the distant mountains where his ranch lay. She never saw him, but she felt him, like the steady presence of the big sky overhead. One afternoon the twins begged her to take them berry-picking beyond the edge of town. Rowena hesitated, knowing Harlan and his friends had been spotted riding the ridges, but the children's hopeful faces won out. They walked together through tall grass that whispered against her skirts, the sun warm on their backs and the scent of sage and wildflowers filling the air. Emma picked handfuls of tiny strawberries, her cheeks stained red with juice, while Elias filled a basket with serious determination. Rowena watched them with a soft smile, her heart aching with a mixture of joy and old grief. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what a real family might feel like. Trouble found them as the sun began to dip. Harlan and two of his rough companions rode over the rise, dust curling behind their horses like smoke signals of malice. The drifter dismounted with a sneer that twisted his face into something ugly. "Well, if it ain't the delicate widow playing house with orphans. You think that big dumb cowboy can protect you forever?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her petite form. The twins pressed against Rowena's sides, trembling. She lifted her chin, voice quiet but clear as spring water. "Modem not yours to claim, Mr. Harlan. These children need safety, not your anger. Leave us." Harlan laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Safety? Out here, a fragile thing like you lasts about as long as a snowflake in July." He reached out to grab her arm, but Rowena stepped back with surprising grace, positioning herself between him and the children. Her heart hammered like a scared rabbit, yet she stood firm, her slender body a living shield. In that moment, her resilience shone brighter than any weapon could. She did not scream or beg. She simply spoke with the steady calm of a woman who had already lost everything and survived. "These children have known enough fear. If you harm them, the whole territory will hear how a grown man terrorized orphans and a widow trying to build something honest." Her words, soft yet unyielding, made Harlan pause. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. For the first time they saw not a weak target, but a woman whose gentle strength refused to break. Before Harlan could recover, the heavy thunder of approaching hooves rolled across the prairie. Garrick appeared on the horizon, riding straight and tall, his massive frame silhouetted against the setting sun like a guardian spirit of the mountains. He did not gallop in fury. He simply rode up and stopped his horse beside Rowena, swinging down with that surprising, quiet grace. His steel blue eyes met Harlan's with calm authority that needed no raised voice. The drifter backed away, muttering, "This ain't over, giant." But his words lacked the earlier bite. Garrick said nothing in reply. He simply placed one enormous hand lightly on Rowena's shoulder, the touch so gentle it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The warmth of his calloused palm seeped through her thin blouse, steadying her trembling frame. The twins looked up at him with wide-eyed wonder, no longer afraid. Emma whispered, "You came for us." Garrick's deep voice rumbled soft, "Like I always will, little one." That evening he walked them back to town, leading his horse while the children rode double in the saddle, giggling despite the earlier fear. Rowena walked beside the giant cowboy, her petite height barely reaching his chest. The prairie wind carried the scent of wood smoke from distant homesteads, and for the first time the silence between them felt comfortable rather than heavy. She glanced up at his rugged profile. "You do not have to keep helping us, Mr. Garrick. I'm learning to stand on my own." He looked down at her, his expression softening in the golden light. "A man chooses what he stands for, Miss Rowena, and Moat choose this." Back at the boarding house, he helped carry the children's baskets inside. Before leaving, he paused in the doorway, filling the frame completely. "If trouble comes knocking again, send word to the ranch. My door is open." Rowena nodded, her hazel eyes holding his for a long moment, something warm and unspoken passing between them. As he rode away into the gathering twilight, she pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the first real stirrings of healing in a heart that had known only winter for so long. The twins fell asleep that night, whispering about their giant protector and the kind widow who made them feel safe. Rowena sat by the window, watching the stars emerge over the Montana sky, and allowed herself to dream just a little. The town still whispered cruel things, but her quiet resilience was growing roots deep into this harsh land. And somewhere in the mountains, a silent giant was beginning to believe he might not have to walk alone anymore. The bond was forming, slow and tender as dawn creeping over the peaks, but the real tests still waited in the shadows of Willow Creek. The weeks that followed wrapped Rowena, the twins, and Garrick in a quiet rhythm that felt like the first true spring tehat they kept after a long Montana winter. The emotional bond did not burst into flame overnight. It grew slow and steady, like wildflowers pushing through rocky soil, one tender moment at a time. Rowena began visiting Garrick's ranch more often, always with the children in tow, bringing baskets of fresh-baked bread or jars of preserve she had made with her own slender hands. Each journey across the open prairie strengthened something deep inside her, a sense of belonging she had not felt since before grief had hollowed her out. Garrick's ranch sat nestled against the foothills, a sturdy log cabin they kept tehat smoke curling from the chimney and wide porches that looked out over endless grasslands. The first time Rowena stepped inside, her hazel eyes widened at the simple beauty of it. Heavy timbers, a massive stone fireplace, and the faint scent of pine and leather filling every corner. The giant cowboy moved carefully around her, as if afraid his sheer size might accidentally overwhelm her delicate frame. He spoke little, but his actions said everything. He built a small bench just the right height for the twins, so their feet could touch the floor when they sat at his table. He cleared a sunny corner of the kitchen and told her without ceremony, "Plant what you like here, ma'am. Ground's good." Elias and Emma bloomed under that roof like children finally allowed to breathe. Elias followed Garrick everywhere, his small legs working double time to keep up with the giant S-long strides. One afternoon, the boy tried lifting a harness too heavy for him and stumbled. Instead of scolding, Garrick knelt down, his massive frame folding with surprising gentleness, and placed his huge hand over the child's smaller one. Together they lifted it. "See, son? Strength ain't always about doing it alone." Elias looked up at him with shining eyes. "You re the strongest man in the whole world." Garrick's steel-blue gaze softened. "Only strong enough to keep you safe." Emma took to Rowena like a flower turning toward the sun. The little girl would climb into the widow's lap by the fire each evening, nestling against her slim shoulder, while Rowena read from an old book of fairy tales she had carried from back east. The firelight danced across Rowena's chestnut hair as she brushed Emma's curls and whispered, "You are so loved, sweet one. No one will ever take that from you again." The child's innocent voice would reply, "You re our mama now, aren't you?" Rowena's throat tightened with unshed tears, but she smiled and nodded. "In my heart, yes, always." Garrick watched these moments from across the room, his rugged face unreadable to most, but revealing quiet longing to anyone who truly looked. He had carried his own hidden sorrows for years, the loss of his family in a raid long ago that left him believing he was meant to walk the mountains alone. Rowena's gentle presence began to heal those old wounds. She noticed how he favored his left shoulder on cold mornings and started leaving warm compresses wrapped in cloth near his chair. She baked apple pies with cinnamon he secretly loved, setting them on the windowsill to cool. Small acts that said, "Mote see you, mote care." One crisp evening, as the sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, they sat together on the wide porch after the twins had fallen asleep inside. Rowena's petite form looked even smaller, wrapped in one of Garrick's heavy wool coats, the sleeves hanging past her hands. The prairie wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant wood smoke. She spoke softly into the gathering dusk. "I was so broken when Maud arrived here. Everyone saw only fragility, a woman who would surely shatter. But you saw something worth protecting. Why?" Garrick stared out at the land for a long moment before his deep voice rumbled low. "Because Mott know what it feels like when the world decides you read too much or not enough. My size made folks fear me or mock me. Yours made them dismiss you. But strength comes in different shapes, Miss Rowena. Yours is the kind that keeps little hearts beating when everything else falls apart. Yours is the kind that makes a man remember he still has a heart worth offering." Tears slipped down her cheeks then, silent and healing. She reached out and placed her small hand on his massive forearm. The contrast between them was breathtaking, her delicate fingers against his corded muscle and sun-weathered skin. "Thank you for letting us into your world." For the first time since losing everything, Mote feels safe enough to dream again. He turned his hand palm up beneath hers, enveloping her fingers completely yet holding them with infinite care, as if she were the most precious thing the frontier had ever produced. From then on, the found family grew roots. Garrick taught the twins to ride, his huge hands steadying them in the saddle while Rowena watched from the fence, her heart swelling with a warmth she had not known she could still feel. Rowena mended Garrickette's shirts, her needle flying with quiet grace while he split wood nearby, the rhythmic thunk of the axe a comforting sound. Evenings filled ve-kept hot stories by the fire, laughter from the children, and long comfortable silences between the adults that spoke louder than words. The town noticed the change and grew uneasy. Whispers turned sharper. The banker sneered to customers, "That fragile widow has bewitched the giant. Mark my words, she bring trouble down on all of us." Harlan was seen riding the ridges again, drinking and plotting with bitter men who resented anyone finding happiness they themselves had lost. But inside the ranch house, none of that reached them yet. The healing had begun in earnest. Rowena's hazel eyes lost some of their haunted shadows. Garrick's rare smiles came more often, lighting his rugged face like sunrise over the peaks. One night, as snow began to dust the mountains early, Emma woke from a nightmare and crawled into Rowena's lap. Garrick brought them both a cup of warm milk and sat on the floor beside the chair, his back against the wall so the little girl could reach out and touch his shoulder. "You read both here," she whispered sleepily. "No bad men can get us." Rowena met Garrick's eyes over the child's head, and in that shared gaze passed a promise deeper than any spoken vow. They were becoming a family, forged not by blood but by choice, resilience, and the quiet protective love of a giant cowboy who had finally found someone worth shielding with his entire world. Yet even as tenderness bloomed, the shadows outside the cabin doors lengthened. The town's cruelty had not faded. It was only waiting for the right moment to strike at the fragile heart of their new beginning. The silent protection Garrick offered did not come with loud declarations or dramatic rescues every day. It revealed itself in the steady, unshakable way a mountain stands against the fiercest storms, quiet, immense, and always there. As winter tightened its grip on the Montana Territory, bringing biting winds that howled down from the peaks and snow that blanketed the prairie in white silence, his presence became the foundation everything else rested upon. Rowena felt it in small but profound ways that healed her fragile spirit one careful layer at a time. Mornings at the ranch now began with the heavy thunk of Garrick splitting firewood before dawn, the sound carrying through the crisp air like a promise that warmth would always be ready. He never announced what he was doing. He simply ensured the woodbox by the stove stayed full and the paths to the barn stayed shoveled wide enough for Rowena's smaller steps. When she stepped outside wrapped in her thin shawl, he would appear without a word, draping one of his own heavy coats around her slender shoulders. The garment swallowed her petite frame, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips, but the wool carried his scent of leather, pine, and safety. She would look up at him, hazel eyes soft with gratitude, and he would simply nod once, his steel-blue gaze saying more than any speech could. The twins thrived under this unspoken shield. Elias took to riding out with Garrick to check the herd, perched proudly in front of the giant cowboy on the massive horse. The boy's small voice would chatter about everything and nothing while Garrick listened. Ve kept at patient silence, occasionally offering short, powerful wisdom. A man takes care of what his, son, land, animals, family. Elias would beam and repeat the words later to Emma like sacred truth. The little girl, meanwhile, followed Rowena through the cabin, helping with small chores, her laughter filling rooms that had stood empty for too long. When nightmares still came, Garrick would rise from his chair by the fire without being asked, his enormous frame moving with surprising gentleness as he lifted the child and carried her back to bed, humming a low, rumbling tune that vibrated through his chest like distant thunder made soothing. Word of their arrangement spread through Willow Creek like dry grass catching sparks, the town's cruelty sharpened. At the mercantile one afternoon, Rowena stood quietly at the counter with a short list, while the owner's wife sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, look who's playing house up at the Giantess Ranch. Fragile little widow sank her claws in quick, didn't she? Must be nice having a mountain do all the work while you bat those pretty eyes." The other customers chuckled, cold and mocking. Rowena's cheeks flushed, but she capete, her voice steady and soft. "These supplies are for the children, ma'am. They need warm clothes for winter. No more, no less." The woman rolled her eyes and overcharged her anyway. Garrick, who had been waiting outside with the wagon, heard every word through the open door. He did not storm in. He simply stepped onto the boardwalk when Rowena emerged, his massive height casting a long shadow that made the snickering inside die away. Without a single raised word, he paid the difference from his own pocket later that week, delivering the extra goods himself. The mercantile owner never overcharged again. That was Garrick's way. His protection flowed like a deep river, powerful and silent, reshaping the landscape around Rowena without ever needing to roar. One bitter evening, a fierce blizzard swept down from the mountains, wind screaming across the prairie and driving snow so thick it blinded a man at 10 paces. Rowena had been in town helping the preacher's wife with mending when the storm hit without warning. She bundled the twins close and tried to make the long walk back toward the ranch, but the wind cut through her coat like knives, and the children's small legs buckled in the drifts. Panic rose in her chest, memories of loss and abandonment threatening to swallow her whole. Then, through the howling white, came the steady creak of wagon wheels and the heavy plod of hooves. Garrick appeared like a legend carved from the storm itself, his broad shoulders dusted white, ice clinging to his dark stubble. He swung down and lifted both children into the wagon bed with one arm each, wrapping them in thick blankets he had brought just in case. Rowena he lifted last, his huge hands spanning her waist completely as he placed her gently beside him on the seat. The contrast of his immense strength against her delicate build felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You should have sent word," he rumbled, voice low against the wind. She leaned into his side, drawing warmth from his massive frame. "I did not want to trouble you." His reply came simple and final. "You are not trouble, you are mine to keep safe." That night in the cabin, with the storm raging outside and the fire crackling inside, the emotional depth between them deepened further. The twins slept soundly in their beds, cheeks flushed from the cold and safety. Rowena sat across from Garrick at the heavy oak table, her small hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he had prepared, strong and sweet just the way she liked. She spoke into the quiet, her voice barely above the crackle of logs. Everyone else saw only my fragility and turned away. "You see it and step closer. Why does your protection feel like the first real home mote have known?" Garrick stared into the fire for a long moment, the flames dancing across his rugged features, because I have walked alone long enough to know the difference between being big and being strong. Being big scares people off. Being strong means standing for ve kepatate matters even when it costs you. You and those children matter, Rowena, more than land or cattle or any opinion from town. His massive hand reached across the table and covered hers completely, Callus's rough yet touch, impossibly tender. She turned her palm up, interlacing her delicate fingers as far as they would go with his. In that simple contact, healing flowed both ways. Her quiet resilience softened his long loneliness. His unwavering authority gave her shattered heart a place to rest. Days turned to weeks. Garrick's silent protection showed in 100 small shields. When Harlan and his rough friends were spotted circling the ranch boundaries, Garrick rode the perimeter each dusk, his towering silhouette against the sunset enough to make them keep their distance. He never drew a weapon. His presence alone warned them away. When the banker tried to spread rumors that a single woman living with a bachelor giant was scandalous, Garrick rode into town alone one morning, filled the entire doorway of the bank, and stated calmly, "The widow and children are under my care. Any man who speaks against them answers to me." The banker paled and the rumors quieted. Through it all, Rowena grew stronger in her gentleness. She baked bread for Garrick ve kepite, hot herbs from her garden, mended his clothes with tiny precise stitches, and read stories aloud each night so the whole found family could gather close. The children called them Ma and Pa in innocent slips that made both adults pause with aching hope. The prairie winds carried woodsmoke and possibility. Snow melted into early spring mud, and new calves appeared in the pastures, fragile and wobbly just like the new life taking shape inside the cabin. Yet even as Garrick's protection wrapped them in safety, the town resentment simmered hotter. Harlan had not forgotten his humiliation. Whispers grew into plans. The fragile widow and her giant shield had defied the natural order, and the cruelest hearts in Willow Creek decided it was time to strike at the heart of their happiness. The real test was coming, closer with every passing day, like thunder rolling just beyond the mountains. The fragile peace at the ranch shattered like thin ice under a cruel boot one raw spring morning when the town finally decided enough was enough. Word had spread fast that Garrick had taken the delicate widow and the orphans fully under his roof, and the narrow hearts of Willow Creek could not stand the sight of such undeserved happiness. Harlan rode in at the head of a bitter group, their faces twisted with the kind of resentment that feeds on other people's joy. They came not with guns blazing, but with something sharper, public shame meant to break Rowena where force had failed. It started at the spring town meeting held in the old church hall, the very place where folks gathered to pretend they were God-fearing while nursing grudges like prized livestock. Rowena had come into town alone that day, leaving the twins safely vekeptehat Garrick at the ranch, determined to prove she could still stand on her own 2 feet. She wore her faded blue calico dress, hair neatly pinned, her petite frame moving with quiet grace down the boardwalk. The moment she stepped inside the crowded hall, the air turned cold as a grave. Heads turned. Whispers slithered through the pews like snakes. The banker stood first, his voice oily and loud. Look at her, folks. The fragile little widow who sank her hooks into the biggest ranch in the territory, using those orphans as bait and her pretty face as the trap. A real woman would have managed on her own instead of hiding behind a giant simpleton. Harsh laughter rippled through the room. One woman sneered from the back row, her tone dripping venom. She probably ran from her first husband, too. Brought shame vekepi to her all the way from back east. Now she's playing house like she belongs here. Pathetic. Rowena stood in the aisle, slender shoulders straight, hazel eyes steady though her heart pounded like a trapped bird. She spoke softly but clearly, her voice carrying on the tense silence. Mot came here with nothing but honest hope. Mot lost my husband to fever, then everything else to circumstances beyond my control. These children needed care, and Mot gave it freely. If that offends you, then your hearts are smaller than you claim. Her words, gentle yet resilient, only fueled the fire. Harlan pushed forward from the crowd, his face red with drink and old grudge. You don't get to stand there looking all delicate and innocent. You owe me for my brother's contract. Mort say we take a vote right now. Send the widow packing before she brings ruin on us all. The room erupted in mocking agreement, voices rising in cruel chorus, fragile flower, gold digger, bad luck charm. They pressed closer, surrounding her small form, their words lashing like whips. A man she had once done laundry for spat near her boots. Go back where you came from, widow. No man here wants your kind except that oversized fool who don't know better. Tears burned in Rowena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She lifted her chin, voice trembling yet unbroken. Mot will not be driven out for trying to build something good. These children deserve better than your bitterness. The crowd laughed louder, enjoying the spectacle of the delicate woman cornered and humiliated. Someone shoved a petition paper at her, demanding she sign away any claim to happiness in the territory. Hands reached to grab her arm, not to hurt physically, but to drag her forward in shame for all to see. In that crushing moment, Rowena's quiet resilience shone like a lantern in the dark. She did not scream or fight back with fists. She simply stood her ground, petite and fragile against the storm of cruelty, her inner strength refusing to snap. Mot pity every one of you, she whispered, voice steady. You have families and still choose loneliness, Mut have found mine through kindness. Do what you will. The doors of the church hall burst open with a force that rattled the windows. Garrick filled the entire frame, his massive 6'8" frame blocking out the spring sunlight. He did not shout. He did not charge. He simply walked forward, each heavy step measured and powerful, until he stood directly beside Rowena. His steel blue eyes swept the room once, calm and authoritative, and every voice died as if choked by an invisible hand. The giant cowboy placed one enormous hand lightly on her slender shoulder, the touch protective and impossibly gentle. His deep voice rolled out low and final, carrying to every corner. Enough. The single word landed heavier than any blow. Harlan tried to bluster, stepping forward with a mocking sneer. You gonna hide your little pet behind your bulk forever, giant? The whole town sees what she is. Garrick's gaze locked onto him without blinking. Mort see a woman of courage and 2 children who finally know safety. You see only what your small heart allows. Turn around, all of you. This ends now. His immense presence alone, towering and unmovable, made grown men shrink back. No fists flew. No shots rang out. Just the quiet, overwhelming authority of a man who refused to let cruelty touch what he cherished. Rowena looked up at him, her delicate face pale but eyes shining with profound trust. The contrast between them had never been more striking, her slim vulnerability sheltered by his massive strength. The twins, who had somehow slipped in behind him, ran to cling to her skirts, their innocent voices piercing the heavy silence. Don't let them take our mom, Mr. Garrick. She makes everything better. The children's pure plea broke something in the room. A few women lowered their eyes in shame. The banker cleared his throat uncomfortably. But the damage had been attempted, the humiliation meant to crush Rowena's spirit delivered in full public view. Garrick guided her and the children out with calm dignity, his broad back a living wall between them and the muttering crowd. Outside, the prairie wind tugged at Rowena's chestnut hair as she leaned against his side for a moment, drawing strength from his warmth. They tried to break me today, she said softly. His reply came short and powerful. They failed, because you are stronger than they will ever understand. He lifted the twins into the wagon with effortless care, then helped Rowena up, his huge hands spanning her waist completely yet holding her like fine china. As they rode away toward the ranch, the town watched from the church windows, their cruelty momentarily silenced, but not gone. Harlan spat in the dirt, eyes burning with fresh plans. The climax had come, the deliberate attempt to humiliate and drive out the fragile widow exposed in its ugliness. Yet in the face of it, Rowena's resilience held firm, and Garrick's silent protection stood absolute. The real retaliation, the moment the giant cowboy would use his immense power to crush the bullies and claim his family once and for all, was now inevitable. The mountains loomed ahead, promising both shelter and the final storm still brewing on the horizon. The ride back to the ranch that afternoon felt heavier than any storm Garrick had ever faced. Rowena sat close beside him on the wagon seat, her petite frame still trembling from the public humiliation in the church hall, though she tried hard to hide it. The twins huddled in the back under a blanket, their small faces pale but trusting as they watched the giant cowboy guide the horses with steady hands. The prairie wind carried the scent of fresh spring grass and distant wood smoke, but beneath it lingered the bitter taste of the town's cruelty. Garrick did not speak much during the journey. He simply drove with quiet purpose, his massive shoulders squared, steel blue eyes fixed on the mountains ahead, like a man who had already decided the path forward. That night, after the children were tucked safely into bed with stories of brave hearts and new beginnings, Garrick and Rowena sat by the great stone fireplace. The fire crackled warmly, casting golden light across her delicate features and highlighting the exhaustion in her hazel eyes. She spoke first, voice soft and weary. They wanted to break me today, to make me feel small and unwanted again, like when Moat first arrived with nothing. Moat stood there feeling every cruel word like stones thrown at a fragile window. Yet somehow Moat did not shatter, because you were there. Garrick turned his rugged face toward her, the flames dancing across his strong jaw and dark stubble. His deep voice rumbled low. You never needed me to stand for you, Rowena. You already were standing. Mort only made sure they saw it clear. But words from small hearts have power when they come in numbers. Tomorrow Moat end it, not with fists, with truth and the weight this land understands. She reached out, placing her small hand on his massive forearm, the contrast striking and beautiful. Moat trusts you. More than Moat have trusted anyone in years. Dawn had barely broken when Garrick rode into Willow Creek alone, his towering frame seated tall on his big buckskin horse. News of the church hall confrontation had spread like wildfire, and the main street already buzzed with anticipation of more trouble. Harlan and his rough companions lounged outside the saloon, laughing loud and mocking as they spotted the giant approaching. The banker stepped out from his office, arms crossed, a smug sneer twisting his thin lips. The mercantile owner and several women gathered near the church steps, ready to watch the giant get put in his place once and for all. Garrick dismounted in the center of the street with deliberate calm, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud that seemed to echo off every building. At 6'8" and built like the mountains themselves, he needed no raised voice or drawn weapon. His mere presence commanded the entire town to attention. He walked straight toward the gathered group, each step measured and powerful, until he stood before Harlan like a living wall. The drifter tried to sneer, but his voice cracked slightly. Come to threaten us, giant. We got rights here. That fragile widow owes me. Garrick's steel blue eyes locked onto him without blinking. No threats, only facts. You got no legal claim on Miss Rowena, no paper, no marriage. Only bitterness because your brother was a fool and a drunk who left her with nothing. The words landed heavy and final. Harlan sputtered, face reddening. She belongs with me. Contract says so. The giant crossed his enormous arms over his broad chest, the fabric of his flannel shirt stretching tight. Then show the contract. Right here. Right now. Silence fell like a hammer. Harlan had none and everyone knew it. The banker stepped forward, voice oily and mocking. This is highly irregular, Mr. Garrick. A single woman living under your roof brings scandal. The town has standards. Garrick turned his gaze slowly to the banker, towering over him until the smaller man seemed to shrink. Standards? You foreclosed on a grieving widow with 2 orphaned children and raised prices on her while she took in laundry to survive. Your standards are built on cruelty, not honor. Maude have offered her and the children honest protection and a home. If that offends your small-minded rules, then change them or step aside. The banker opened his mouth but closed it again under the weight of that calm, authoritative stare. One of the women from the meeting hissed loudly, "She's just a delicate little thing using you, you big fool." Garrick's reply came short and powerful. She is stronger than every one of you combined. She survived loss that would break most men here. She raised those children, Vekep. Te had nothing but kindness when you all turned your backs. Call her fragile again and you call yourselves blind. The group shifted uncomfortably. The mercantile owner tried next, sneering. You think your size makes you above the law? Garrick took one step closer, his massive frame casting a long shadow. Size doesn't make me right, doing right does, and keeping a good woman and 2 innocent children safe from the likes of you is right. Any man here who wants to test that can step forward now. No one stepped forward. Harlan's friends muttered curses but backed away, eyes darting nervously. The giant cowboy had not raised a hand, yet his unwavering authority crushed their bullying spirit like dry leaves under a boot. He turned to the whole gathered crowd, voice carrying clear and deep across the street. From this day, Rowena, Elias, and Emma are under my full protection. They are my family. Any cruelty, any whisper, any attempt to harm or shame them comes through me first, and mote do not bend. The prairie wind whipped around his broad shoulders as he spoke, making his words feel as permanent as the mountains themselves. Harlan made one last desperate attempt, lunging forward with a mocking laugh. You can just claim her like some prize, giant. She's a widow with nothing. Garrick's response was immediate and final. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper, holding it high so all could see. This is a marriage license, properly witnessed by the circuit judge yesterday evening. Rowena accepted my hand and my name. She is Mrs. Garrick now. The twins carry my name too. We stood before God and made it true. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The delicate widow had not been claimed by force or trickery. She had been chosen, cherished, and protected by the one man strong enough to defy them all. Harlan's face twisted in defeat. He spat on the ground and turned away, muttering as he mounted his horse with his friends. The banker slunk back into his office. The women lowered their eyes, some with fresh shame coloring their cheeks. Garrick stood tall for another long moment, letting his immense presence settle over the town like a final warning. Then he swung back into the saddle and rode out without another word, leaving the bullies crushed not by violence but by the quiet, overwhelming power of a man who refused to let cruelty win. Back at the ranch, Rowena waited on the porch with the twins, her slender hands clasped tightly, hazel eyes watching the trail. When Garrick appeared, riding tall and steady, relief washed over her delicate features like sunrise. He dismounted and walked straight to her, dropping to one knee so his massive height matched hers better. His huge hands took her small ones with infinite gentleness. It is done. They will not trouble you again. You are my wife. Those children are ours. No more running, no more shame. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. You used your strength not to destroy them, but to build us a future. Mot never dreamed such protection could feel like love. He wrapped his enormous arms around her petite frame, pulling her close against his broad chest where she fit perfectly, safe and cherished. The twins ran to them, laughing and clinging to both, their innocent voices rising in joy. We have a pa and ma forever now. In that moment, the hero's retaliation reached its true height. Garrick had crushed the bullies with authority, honor, and unwavering truth. He had claimed his fragile bride not as a prize, but as the heart of a new family forged in resilience and healing. The ranch house behind them stood warm and welcoming, wood smoke curling from the chimney into the big Montana sky. The giant cowboy had shielded his delicate widow through the worst the town could offer, and in doing so had won her heart completely. Yet the deepest peace still waited just ahead, in the quiet days of building a life together where love could finally bloom without fear. The days after Garrick's stand in the center of Willow Creek unfolded like a gentle spring rain washing away years of dust and bitterness from Rowena's soul. The ranch house, once a quiet shelter for a solitary giant, now rang with the laughter of children and the soft warmth of a woman's presence. Rowena moved through the rooms with newfound lightness, her petite frame no longer carrying the heavy shadow of abandonment. She baked bread each morning, her slender hands working the dough with quiet joy while sunlight streamed through the windows and painted golden patterns across the wooden floors. The twins, Elias and Emma, chased each other across the wide porch, their voices bright and fearless, calling Garrick Pa and Rowena Ma without hesitation now. The found family had taken root deep in the Montana soil, strong and thriving where cruelty had once tried to scorch the earth. Garrick watched it all with his usual quiet intensity, but something profound had softened in his steel blue eyes. The massive cowboy who had walked alone for so long now found reasons to smile more often, small crinkles forming at the corners of his rugged face whenever Rowena looked up at him from her garden or when the children tugged on his sleeves demanding stories. He still spoke little, but his actions sang with love. Each evening he carved small wooden toys for the twins by the fire, his huge hands moving with surprising delicacy. He built Rowena a proper rocking chair sized perfectly for her delicate build, placing it beside his own massive one on the porch so they could sit together and watch the prairie stretch endlessly toward the mountains. The size difference between them remained breathtaking. Her slim vulnerability nestled safely against his towering strength, yet it had become the most natural harmony either had ever known. One golden afternoon as summer fully claimed the territory, Rowena stood in the kitchen kneading dough when Garrick entered, filling the doorway completely. He crossed to her without a word and wrapped his enormous arms around her from behind, pulling her back gently against his broad chest. She leaned into him, her chestnut hair brushing his chin, breathing in the scent of leather, pine, and home. "Mott still wakes some mornings afraid it was all a dream," she whispered. "That the town will come again or that Mott will lose this safety." His deep voice rumbled through her. "You will not. Moat stood against them once, and Moat will stand every day after. You healed something in me Moat thought was dead, Rowena. You and the children gave this old mountain man a reason to believe in tomorrow." She turned in his arms, tilting her delicate face up to meet his gaze. "Then let us build many tomorrows together." Their first real kiss happened there in the sunlit kitchen, slow and tender, filled with all the longing and healing they had both carried silently for months. Garrick lifted her effortlessly onto the edge of the table so their heights aligned better, his massive hands cradling her face like she was the rarest treasure the frontier had ever offered. No rush, no demands. Just two wounded hearts finally finding wholeness in each other. The twins peeked in later, giggling innocently at the sight, and the laughter that followed healed another layer of old pain. Word slowly reached them that the town had changed in subtle ways. Several women began leaving small gifts at the edge of the ranch lane, jars of jam or bolts of cloth with quiet notes of apology. The banker sent a formal letter acknowledging the marriage and offering fair terms on any future loans. Even Harlan was seen riding out of the territory one dusty morning, his bitterness finally defeated by the unbreakable shield of a giant cowboy's honor. Justice had come not through vengeance, but through the quiet power of doing right and refusing to bend. Rowena's resilience had proven stronger than their cruelty, and Garrick's protection had carved out a safe haven where love could flourish. As the seasons turned, their family grew. Another child arrived the following spring, a baby girl with her mother's hazel eyes and her father's strong spirit. Rowena held the newborn close while Garrick stood watch, his enormous frame casting a protective shadow over the bed. The twins crowded close, marveling at their new sister with wide-eyed wonder. In the quiet hours of the night when the prairie winds whispered outside, Rowena would rest her head on Garrick's broad chest and listen to his steady heartbeat. "You shielded me when Moat was at my most fragile," she would say softly. And in return, Moat found a strength Moat never knew Moat possessed. He would press a kiss to her chestnut hair and reply simply, "We shielded each other, love. That is what family does." Years later, when the children had grown tall and strong under the big Montana sky, they would gather on the porch to hear the story of how a delicate widow and a giant cowboy defied an entire town's cruelty to build something beautiful. Elias would speak hot pride about the day his pa stood silent and mighty in the street. Emma would recall how their ma never broke, even when the world tried to shatter her. And little sister would listen with shining eyes, learning that true strength comes in many forms, some loud and towering, others quiet and resilient as wildflowers pushing through rock. The ranch thrived. Cattle grazed peacefully across the pastures, gardens bloomed under Rowena's gentle care, and wood smoke always curled invitingly from the chimney. The harsh frontier life continued had its blizzards and droughts, but inside the cabin love created its own shelter. Garrick taught his sons to work with honor and his daughters to stand tall no matter their size. Rowena taught them all that kindness is the greatest shield of all. Together they proved that found family, born from pain and protected by unwavering devotion, could heal even the deepest wounds. And so the story that began with a broken widow facing her past on a dusty street ended with a complete, beautiful circle of love. The giant cowboy had not only shielded the fragile woman everyone else discarded, he had cherished her, lifted her, and walked beside her into a future brighter than any prairie sunrise. In the end, justice came softly, healing came deeply, and love, true frontier love, proved stronger than any cruelty the world could offer. Folks, if this tale touched something deep in your heart tonight, if it reminded you that protectors still walk this earth and that fragile hearts can bloom again, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button on Cowboy Ironheart and join our growing family of story lovers who believe in second chances and found homes. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are worth shielding. Drop a comment telling me what part moved you most. Your support keeps these healing Western tales alive. This is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment and educational purposes. The characters, events, and situations in this story are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real people or real events is purely coincidental. This content was created with the aid of AI tools and has been carefully edited by the team at Cowboy Ironheart. All rights reserved.